The origins of America's wartime espionage efforts are often told through the bold successes, the codebreakers of Arlington Hall, the Jedburgh teams in France, the victories of Allied intelligence that shaped the course of the conflict. But hidden behind those well-known triumphs are stories seldom spoken. The early OSS missions that were so fraught with risk, so thinly supported, that many ended in utter silence. One of the first of these was Operation WWII, an obscure attempt in late 1942 that stands as a stark reminder of how unprepared the United States was for the shadow war unfolding across Europe. The OSS had only just been established under General William Wild Bill Donovan, a man who believed that secret warfare would be as important as any battlefield victory. His new operatives trained at hastily assembled camps in Maryland and Virginia, adapting civilian skills into espionage craft with only weeks of preparation. Many came from universities, professions, or immigrant communities with first-hand knowledge of Axis territories. Few had ever set foot behind enemy lines. Yet these were the men chosen for one of the OSS' first sabotage operations, a mission aimed at crippling German logistics in northern Italy by destroying a vital rail line near La Spezia. In November 1942, the small sabotage team selected for Operation WWII assembled in North Africa. They studied aerial photographs, memorized Italian coastal features, and practiced using demolition charges fashioned from plastic explosives and British time pencils. The target, a railway tunnel used to funnel German equipment through the Ligurian coastline, was essential to Axis supply chains feeding Italy, the Balkans, and southern France. Still, planning was rushed. Communications were unreliable. Intelligence on German patrol patterns was incomplete. Even Donovan privately described early OSS missions as experiments conducted under fire. A diary entry from one unnamed OSS officer captured the mood. We walked into the unknown with more confidence than experience. None of us were under any illusions. The Germans owned the night. The team departed by sea under the cover of darkness, carried aboard a small motor vessel meant to slip past coastal watch posts. But the Ligurian coast was no easy landing site. The coastline rose sharply into cliffs, with narrow coves that left little room for stealth. And in late autumn, the Mediterranean storms were unforgiving. The WWII team's first challenge came before they ever set foot on Italian soil. High swells battered their vessel, pushing them off course. Navigation instruments malfunctioned. A final attempt to reach the shoreline before dawn risked exposing them to German coastal artillery. By sunrise, the team withdrew, their mission aborted, not due to enemy action, but to the weight of logistical obstacles that revealed just how precarious the OSS early operations truly were. Yet what makes Operation WWII so haunting is what followed. The team prepared for a second attempt, determined to complete their objective. But before new plans could be finalized, German patrols increased around La Spezia, likely tipped off by unusual naval activity. Italian civilians reported seeing foreign boats offshore. Rumors spread quickly in wartime Italy, and rumors often drew the attention of the Gestapo. Within days, Axis counterintelligence began scouring coastal villages, questioning fishermen, monitoring radio frequencies, and tightening the patrol grid. The OSS assessed the situation as increasingly dangerous. Still, a sense of urgency prevailed. Destroying the rail line could slow German reinforcements moving north from Italy to the collapsing fronts in France and the Balkans. But each day of delay reduced the chance of success. By early 1943, the WWII operatives received orders to stand down, the mission suspended indefinitely. Their window of opportunity had closed. Officially, Operation WWII ended as a failure due to weather and navigation. But archival records hint at deeper lessons about overconfidence, insufficient reconnaissance, and the unpredictable nature of sabotage missions conducted with minimal local support. For the OSS, WWII became an early example of how even the best intentions could falter amid the complexities of occupied Europe. Yet this failed first attempt laid the groundwork for something far more tragic. The intelligence gathered, the tactics refined, and the determination to hit the La Spezia rail line all fed directly into a second attempt, Operation WWII. This time the team would be larger, the planning more thorough, and the stakes even higher. What followed would become one of the darkest and least known episodes in OSS history. And as the operatives prepared to return to the same hostile coastline in 1944, few could know that their mission, rooted in the quiet failure of WWII, would end not with sabotage but with silence. By early 1944, the war in Italy had entered a grinding phase. German forces under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring had dug into defensive lines stretching across the peninsula, slowing the Allied advance to a costly crawl. Every supply line moving northward through the Ligurian coast became a strategic artery feeding German units resisting the push from Anzio and Cassino. It was against this backdrop that the OSS revived a mission once deemed too risky, another sabotage operation against the same railway tunnel near La Spezia. This second attempt, Operation Ginny II, would become one of the most tragic episodes in the history of American espionage during World War II. Ginny II was built on the lessons and failures of its predecessor. This time, the OSS assembled a 15-man team composed of Italian-American operatives fluent in the language and familiar with the terrain. Many came from the OSS operational groups, units trained for paramilitary actions behind enemy lines. Their weapons were modest: Thompson submachine guns, explosives packed into small satchels, compasses, silk escape maps, and a single radio set meant to keep them linked to Allied naval forces offshore. The objective remained deceptively simple: land covertly on the Italian coast, reach the railway tunnel, set charges, and escape by sea before dawn. But from the beginning, events seemed stacked against them. Intelligence suggested increased German patrols after the failed 1942 attempt, and partisan groups in the region were under severe pressure from the Gestapo. Even so, OSS command believed the mission was achievable. Reconnaissance photos showed gaps in the patrol routes. A narrow beachhead southwest of Fermura appeared lightly monitored. And the team, despite their youth, displayed confidence and determination bordering on defiance. One operative reportedly remarked during training, "If the Germans catch us, they won't know what hit them." It was bravado spoken more out of courage than naivety. On the night of March 22, 1944, the OSS team boarded 2 PT boats near Corsica, their packs heavy with explosives. The sea was calm, the moon only a thin crescent. As the engines cut through the dark water, the men reviewed photographs of the coastline, memorizing landmarks, cliffs, stairways carved into rock, small fishing huts that might serve as orientation points. A handwritten operations note captured the tense anticipation: "Speed and silence are our only allies. One mistake and the whole coastline wakes up." Shortly before midnight, the PT boats reached the drop-off point. The operatives transferred into small rubber boats and began paddling toward shore. But just as they approached the rocky inlet, disaster struck. A German coastal patrol spotted the silhouettes of the rubber boats, likely alerted by the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off the paddles. A flare shot into the sky, bathing the water in white light. Machine gun fire erupted from cliffs above. The OSS team tried to push forward, but German troops quickly surrounded the landing area. Several operatives scrambled onto the rocks, taking cover behind boulders. The firefight lasted only minutes. The Americans were badly outnumbered, unfamiliar with the terrain, and without room to maneuver. One by one they were forced to surrender. Captured documents later revealed the shock among German officers. 15 armed saboteurs, wearing civilian clothing, carrying demolition equipment. This was no ordinary incursion. Under the Geneva Conventions, such operatives were in a legal gray zone. Kesselring's command interpreted them not as prisoners of war, but as terrorists, subject to summary execution under Adolf Hitler's infamous Kommandobefehl, the Commando Order of 1942. That decree demanded that all Allied commandos captured behind enemy lines were to be killed immediately, regardless of uniform or intent. For 2 days the prisoners were interrogated in La Spezia. Their fates were sealed long before questioning ended. A German naval tribunal quickly ruled that the OSS operatives were to be executed. On March 26, all 15 men were taken to a remote location near Bocca di Magra, lined up against a wall and shot. Their bodies were buried in shallow graves. No public announcement was made. No records were shared. The mission simply vanished into the fog of war. For months the OSS received no word. Reports listed the Ginny II team as missing. Families were given vague explanations, no confirmed information, status unknown, awaiting updates. Only after the war, through captured German files and testimonies at the Nuremberg trials, did the full truth emerge. The execution of the Ginny II operatives became one of the clearest violations of the laws of war committed by German forces in Italy. Yet even with the facts revealed, many questions lingered. Why did German patrols happen to be in that exact location that night? Were the landings compromised by local informants? Did Axis intelligence actually suspect another sabotage attempt based on earlier reconnaissance? Historians still debate whether the mission failed due to coincidence, preparedness, or betrayal. What is certain is that the silence surrounding Ginny II became emblematic of the perils faced by OSS operatives across Europe. The tragedy reverberated throughout Allied intelligence, prompting strategic reassessments and a renewed push for coordination with local resistance movements. But the loss of those 15 men, trained, determined, and hopeful, cast a long shadow over every operation that followed. And while WWII 2 became one of the most documented OSS failures, the next mission in our story left almost no documentation at all. A three-man liaison team in the Balkans would disappear so completely that even today, their final moments remain uncertain. By the winter of 1944, as the Allied front lines pressed deeper into Axis-held territories, the OSS intensified its efforts to build intelligence networks across the Balkans, a region fractured by overlapping resistance movements, brutal reprisals, and shifting loyalties. Though some missions, like the famed Operation Halyard in Serbia, would become celebrated successes, others faded almost entirely from the official record. Among the most mysterious was a three-man OSS SOE liaison team inserted into the mountains of Slovenia in late 1944, an operation so small, so isolated, that its disappearance barely registered until months after the war had ended. The mission had no name recorded in surviving OSS logs. It appeared in documents simply as an advanced liaison detachment, designed to assess partisan strength in northern Slovenia and coordinate future supply drops. These men, an American OSS officer, a British SOE radio specialist, and a Yugoslav-born interpreter, were tasked with traveling into a region contested by German 97th Army Corps units, Slovene Home Guard forces, and competing partisan factions. Their objective was to locate trusted resistance leaders, establish radio contact with Bari headquarters in Italy, and map safe landing fields for future Allied insertions. The Balkans in 1944 were unlike any other theater of war. Unlike France or Italy, where resistance movements broadly aligned with Allied objectives, Slovenia was a patchwork of groups divided by ideology, ethnicity, and survival. Communist partisans under Tito held significant ground but frequently clashed with local militias and anti-communist forces. German counterinsurgency units launched constant sweeps through mountain passes, burning villages and arresting anyone suspected of aiding saboteurs. Into this crucible of suspicion and violence, 3 operatives parachuted on a cold, moonlit night in November. Their jump was executed from a low-flying RAF Halifax that had taken off from southern Italy. A post-mission aircrew report noted gusty winds and poor visibility, conditions that scattered the operatives as they descended into the heavily forested Javornik Hills. The plane's navigator wrote simply, "Chutes opened. Lights seen. Landing unobserved by enemy." Those words would become tragically ironic. Only the interpreter managed to activate the team's signal flare, indicating a safe landing. The other 2 operatives were not immediately located. According to later partisan testimonies, local shepherds reported hearing boots moving through the forest before dawn, multiple sets, not just the expected 3. Whether those footsteps belonged to German patrols, Home Guard militia, or curious villagers remains unknown. The team regrouped by midday and began moving toward a partisan-held hamlet where contacts were supposed to await them. But the settlement had been abandoned days earlier, burned during a German sweep. The scorched remains of cabins and the silence of the surrounding woods left the operatives with their first troubling question. Had their landing zone been compromised before they ever touched the ground? Stranded without safe houses or guides, the team chose to hide in a forest ravine and attempt radio contact with Bari. The SOE radio specialist set up his Type 3 suitcase transmitter, a compact yet fragile device requiring a hand-crank generator. For 3 days they sent scheduled bursts, receiving no acknowledgement. Whether the transmissions were drowned out by terrain, jammed by German listening posts, or simply missed by Allied operators remains uncertain. A key insight came from later OSS archives. German intelligence units in the region had recently intercepted Allied coded messages related to Balkan operations. This meant that Axis forces may have known, at minimum, that an Allied insertion was planned somewhere in northern Yugoslavia. That knowledge alone could have increased search efforts in the surrounding valleys. On the 4th night, heavy snowfall forced the team to seek better shelter. They moved east toward a cave system marked on their pre-mission sketch maps. What happened next is unknown. The team never made further radio contact. When the war ended in May 1945, OSS leadership attempted to retrace the team's route with partisan assistance. Search parties found only disturbing fragments: a torn section of parachute cloth, an empty American-made ration tin, and boot prints in the mud of an abandoned shepherd's hut. No bodies, no equipment, no definitive clues. Some Slovenian villagers interviewed decades later claimed that a skirmish occurred near the area around that time, possibly between German forces and unidentified operatives. Other accounts suggest that the men may have been intercepted by Home Guard militia, who were deeply suspicious of Allied contacts with communist partisans. A third theory, silent, grim, and plausible, is that the operatives succumbed to exposure after days of evasion in freezing conditions. In the chaos of the Balkan winter, even experienced mountaineers struggled to survive. The lack of concrete evidence created a vacuum filled with speculation. What stands out is the utter disappearance, unusual even by OSS standards. Most failed missions produced remains, captured documents, or post-war testimonies. This operation produced nothing but silence. From a modern perspective, the mission underscores the limits of intelligence work when conducted without reliable local networks or secure communications. It offers a sobering reminder: even the most skilled operatives were at the mercy of terrain, weather, and human uncertainty. In the Balkans, loyalty shifted like the mountain fog, and information was more valuable than gold. The unanswered questions surrounding the three-man team set the stage for an even larger mystery: the vanishing of members of OSS Operational Group Patriot on the Eastern Front, a disappearance marked not by the mountains of Slovenia, but by the far-reaching chaos of German anti-partisan warfare in Poland. By mid-1944, the Eastern Front was collapsing, and with it came a rare but fleeting opportunity for Allied intelligence. As Soviet forces pushed westward, German occupation zones in Poland were being shaken apart, opening narrow windows for covert operations that had previously been impossible. Into this shifting landscape, the OSS deployed a specialized team known as Operational Group Patriot, a unit composed largely of first-generation Polish-American volunteers trained for sabotage, coordination with underground fighters, and intelligence gathering. Their mission was simple on paper yet perilous in execution: land in German-occupied Poland and support resistance cells preparing for a nationwide uprising against the Wehrmacht. But as with many clandestine efforts in World War II, events unfolded far from the expectations of planners in London and Washington. Patriot was one of several OSS operational groups created to blend language fluency with paramilitary skill. These were volunteers who could pass as locals, who understood cultural nuances, and who carried a personal desire to help liberate the lands their families had once called home. Their training emphasized stealth, demolition, coded communication, and maneuvering behind enemy lines with minimal support. "We were not meant to be an army," one member later recalled in an interview, "only a spark in the night." Their insertion into Poland was coordinated through British SOE channels, which had been operating in the region earlier in the war through Polish intelligence networks loyal to the London-based government in exile. The plan was timed to support what would later be remembered as the Warsaw Uprising. Resistance forces were gathering strength, stockpiling weapons, and awaiting the moment when German control would weaken enough to make open revolt possible. Patriot was to land near the Vistula River, link with Armia Krajowa, Home Army, units, and serve as a conduit for Allied communications and supplies. However, German intelligence had already intensified counterinsurgency sweeps across the countryside in anticipation of partisan movements. Villages suspected of aiding resistance efforts were burned. Informants were rewarded for turning over fighters. And unknown to the OSS, German units from the feared Durlwanger Brigade had been redeployed to suppress local uprisings, an ominous development for any covert operatives entering the region. Patriot's insertion was scheduled for July 1944 via a low-altitude Liberator flight departing from Brindisi, Italy. Weather forecasts were poor, with thunderstorms over Central Europe threatening to scatter the drop. Yet the urgency of the planned uprising pressed the mission forward. As the aircraft crossed into Polish airspace, searchlights probed the clouds below, and the roar of German anti-aircraft batteries echoed upward. The crew dropped flares to mark the release point, but swirling winds obscured the landscape, making navigation nearly impossible. When the operatives jumped, the drop zone was misaligned by several kilometers. Instead of landing near pre-identified fields controlled by the Home Army, some parachuted into marshland while others drifted toward a wooded region increasingly patrolled by German anti-partisan forces. The scattered landing fractured the team before they could even begin their assignment. The next morning, local farmers found one operative injured, his parachute tangled in a birch tree. They hid him briefly in a barn, but word of a parachute drop spread quickly, too quickly. German patrols began sweeping nearby villages, arresting dozens. Sensing danger, the villagers urged the operative to flee eastward toward rumored partisan groups. He disappeared into the forest and was never seen again. Another small group from Patriot managed to link with a local Home Army unit. For several days they attempted to transmit coded messages to Allied command, but the Germans had increased radio direction finding operations. Any transmission risked exposing nearby resistance cells to deadly reprisals. The OSS report after the war noted simply, radio contact intermittent, then lost. The remaining operatives faced a grim labyrinth of uncertainty. Some German documents recovered decades later referenced the capture of foreign agents east of Radom around this period, men described as carrying unusual equipment and English-language papers. Yet no names were listed, no photographs taken, and no locations of execution or imprisonment recorded. It was as though the captives passed through a void in the bureaucratic machinery of the Third Reich. What complicates the story further is the shifting political landscape. As Soviet forces advanced, communication between Polish resistance fighters and Western allies deteriorated. The Soviets distrusted the Home Army, viewing them as potential rivals to post-war control. Thus, even surviving witnesses after the war spoke cautiously. Some suggested that the scattered OSS team may have attempted to move toward Soviet lines and never arrived. Others hinted at internal clashes among partisan groups. A resistance fighter interviewed in 1961 offered a chilling suggestion. It was a bad time. We did not always know who came from London, who from Moscow, and who brought danger. Material evidence of Patriots' fate is sparse. A rusted American-made knife was discovered in a forest clearing in the 1950s. A torn section of parachute silk surfaced in a village attic during renovations. But these artifacts offer only traces, footprints of a vanished mission. The disappearance of several Patriot operatives reveals a hard truth about covert warfare in Eastern Europe. The fog of war was not just thick but impenetrable. Lines between ally and enemy blurred. Geography swallowed men whole. And political tensions ensured that some stories would never be fully told. The silence left behind by Patriot echoes eerily into the next episode, a Franco-based OSS SOE mission known as Union 2, where expectations of local support unraveled into a deadly game of uncertainty. In early 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of France, intelligence services raced to strengthen resistance networks across the country. Northern and central France were already alive with sabotage cells, but in regions such as the Haute-Loire, remote, mountainous, and sparsely populated, German control remained firm. Into this volatile environment, the OSS and SOE launched a joint mission codenamed Union 2. The operation's intent was clear: re-establish contact with a local Maquis group, confirm German troop movements toward the coast, and prepare the region for the nationwide uprising that would accompany the Normandy landings. But like many clandestine efforts of the war, Union 2 unfolded into a story of uncertainty, isolation, and sudden disappearance. Union 2 consisted of a small, highly trained team, an American OSS officer versed in demolitions, a British wireless operator with experience in North Africa, and a French liaison familiar with the rural networks of the Massif Central. They were equipped with a lightweight Type 3 radio set, a month's supply of rations, codebooks, silk escape maps, and the bare essentials needed to survive behind enemy lines. They were briefed in Algiers, then flown to a temporary Allied staging airfield on the coast of Algeria before boarding a B-24 Liberator modified for night drops. The jump was scheduled for April 1944. Weather conditions were marginal, clouds drifting low over the Cévennes Mountains, but intelligence officers insisted the timing was critical. German reinforcements were being repositioned across southeastern France, possibly in anticipation of an Allied landing in the Mediterranean or Atlantic. London needed verification of these movements, and the Maquis of Haute-Loire had promised both information and shelter. Shortly after midnight, the B-24 reached the drop zone. Below, darkness concealed a rolling landscape of valleys and stone farmhouses. The pilot cut speed and altitude, and each operative leapt into the void, their parachutes opening like pale flowers in the night. The landing was smooth, but from the start, something felt wrong. The rendezvous farmhouse, marked by a lantern in the window, was dark. The surrounding hills were silent, devoid of the usual signs of resistance activity. No watchers, no code taps on shutters, no distant whistles. By dawn, the team discovered the truth. The local Maquis cell that had agreed to receive them had been dismantled by the Gestapo just days earlier. Tracks in the dirt indicated vehicles had surrounded the farmhouse. Nearby, the walls of a small barn bore bullet holes. Even the villagers avoided the area, fearful the Germans might return. The operatives were alone in hostile territory, with no network to absorb them and no safe houses to support them. Still, Union 2 proceeded with its core objective: gather intelligence. The team moved by night, avoiding main roads and using hedgerows, forests, and dry creek beds to evade detection. Based on interrogations conducted after the war, German forces were on high alert. The Gestapo had intensified searches for parachutists, suspecting an influx ahead of an Allied invasion. Posters warning civilians against aiding terrorists appeared on village walls. Roadblocks were established along the Route Nationale from Clermont-Ferrand to Le Puy-en-Velay. On the second night, the British wireless operator set up the radio in an abandoned shepherd's hut. He sent brief, coded transmissions toward London, short enough to avoid German direction-finding equipment. But atmospheric conditions were poor, and the Germans' radio detection units in Lyon and Vichy were among the most efficient in Europe. Whether any of the messages were received remains unknown. OSS archives contain a single reference to Union 2, noting, "Signal attempts inconclusive. No return contact established." A diary recovered years later from a surviving Maquis fighter suggests that a German patrol passed dangerously close to the shepherd's hut soon after the transmissions. Whether they detected the signal or were simply conducting a routine sweep is unclear. But the team decided to move further south into the highlands, seeking refuge among remote hamlets known for anti-German sentiment. Survival became a daily challenge. Food supplies dwindled. Cold spring rain soaked their clothing. And without local support, even basic navigation grew uncertain. The French liaison urged them to avoid the larger villages, places where collaborators or informants might betray them, but this forced the team deeper into rugged terrain where movement was slow and dangerous. By the third week, their situation had grown desperate. German patrols were tightening, likely alerted by rumors that parachutists had been seen in the area. The OSS officer considered attempting an exfiltration toward the Rhone Valley, where resistance activity was stronger. But reaching such a distance without support seemed impossible. What happened next remains unclear. After the war, scattered reports emerged. A farmer claimed to have seen 3 men heading toward a ravine near Montmazenc. Another recalled hearing gunfire in a forested gorge days later. A German field report noted the neutralization of unidentified agents near a remote valley, but provided no names or details. No bodies were recovered. No personal effects were found. The team had vanished. Union 2 became one of the OSS quiet tragedies, not large enough to draw headlines, not successful enough to be commemorated, but emblematic of the dangers faced by Allied operatives dropped into isolated, compromised networks. Their disappearance illustrates the thin line between mission and mystery in the clandestine war. This silence sets the stage for the final chapter. Operation Greenup, the OSS celebrated infiltration into Austria, shadowed by another reconnaissance team whose fate remains unknown to this day. In the final winter of World War II, as Nazi Germany tightened its grip on the Alpine redoubt and prepared for a last stand, Allied intelligence rushed to penetrate the most fortified and secretive regions of the Reich. This was the environment into which the OSS launched Operation Greenup, one of its most daring and ultimately successful missions inside Austria. Yet the triumph of Greenup is shadowed by another story, one largely forgotten in the retelling. A small reconnaissance team deployed just days earlier, sent ahead to survey key valleys and infiltration points. Their purpose was to clear the path for Greenup. Their fate was never fully understood. The reconnaissance team consisted of 2 Americans and 1 Austrian anti-Nazi exile. Selected for their fluency in German dialects, mountaineering skills, and experience navigating rugged terrain, they trained in the Dolomites in northern Italy during late 1944. Their mission was straightforward in concept. Infiltrate the Ötztal region of Tyrol, gather intelligence on rail routes and German troop positions, and identify potential safe houses for the Greenup operatives who would follow. But standing between them and success were some of the harshest winter conditions in Europe and a German security apparatus anticipating Allied espionage. On February 1945, the trio boarded a modified B-24 Liberator at an Allied airfield near Bari. Their insertion would be by parachute, dropped high in the mountains to avoid detection by German anti-aircraft units concentrated in the valleys. The weather was brutal, cloud cover heavy, winds erratic, temperatures far below freezing. At 0:47 hours they exited the aircraft. Their chutes deployed in the frigid darkness. That was the last time they were ever seen by Allied personnel. Hours later, Operation Greenup's team, Friedrich Mayer, Hans Wigenberg, and Franz Weber, waited anxiously for confirmation that the reconnaissance unit had established radio contact. No signal came. OSS officers in Italy debated whether the team had landed safely or been swept into ravines by the strong alpine winds. A remark in an operations log reads, "No contact established. Possible delay due to weather. Proceed with caution." The Green-Up team decided to continue despite the uncertainty, unaware of the shadow that would follow them. Meanwhile, local Austrian accounts gathered after the war described strange sightings in the mountains around the night of the drop. A farmer from a hamlet near Solden later recalled hearing an aircraft, followed by the sound of heavy objects striking snow. Another resident claimed to have seen torchlight moving across a ridge before dawn. But such sightings were common in the anxious final months of the war. Without corroboration, nothing was certain. What is known is that the region was crawling with German forces. Elements of the 19th Mountain Corps patrolled the passes. SS security units monitored movement between villages. Refugees fleeing the Eastern Front clogged the roads, heightening German paranoia about spies hiding among them. Even experienced mountaineers would have struggled to traverse the terrain with heavy loads of equipment and the constant threat of patrols. Some theories suggest the reconnaissance team may have landed miles from their intended drop zone, separated and unable to regroup. In such conditions, survival would have been measured in hours, not days. Other accounts hint at a German ambush. Weeks after the war, a hunter reported finding scraps of parachute silk tangled in trees above Vent. In a German police archive in Innsbruck, a short handwritten note dated February 1945 references the capture of enemy agents dressed in civilian garb, though no names or identifying details appeared. Another possibility centers on betrayal or miscommunication with local contacts. Resistance networks varied in reliability, and many were under intense surveillance. If the team attempted to approach a suspected safe house, they may have walked directly into a German-controlled trap. What makes the disappearance even more striking is that Operation Green-Up itself succeeded beyond expectations. After skiing for days through treacherous terrain, Green-Up operatives infiltrated Innsbruck, providing some of the most actionable intelligence of the war, reporting on troop movements, railway schedules, and the collapse of German defenses. They even confirmed plans for a Nazi retreat into the Alpine Redoubt, information that shaped Allied strategy for the final push. Yet behind every Green-Up success report, the absence of the initial reconnaissance team loomed like an unanswered question. OSS documents refer to them sparingly, with a single post-war summary stating, "Reconnaissance element unaccounted for. Presumed lost due to operational hazards." Attempts by U.S. Army Graves registration units after the war to locate remains yielded nothing, no bodies, no equipment, not even personal effects. The mountains kept their secrets. The disappearance underscores a sobering reality. Even in operations remembered for brilliance and daring, there were stories that faded into obscurity, missions that began with hope, ended quietly, and left only traces in the snow. In the final months of the world's greatest conflict, countless acts of courage went unrecognized, countless sacrifices unrecorded. And so the war's clandestine history is incomplete, not by omission but by nature. Espionage thrives in the shadows and often perishes there as well. The reconnaissance team preceding Operation Green-Up remains one of those silent losses, a reminder that for every celebrated mission, there were operatives who walked into darkness and never returned. Their story closes our journey through the 5 most tragic OSS missions of World War II, missions marked by silence, mystery, and the high cost of fighting a war in the shadows.